Welcome to Filed Live, a conversation with those at the convergence of data privacy, data security, data regulation, record, and governance. I'm Joe Pearce, RecordPoint head of product. And today I am pleased to welcome Marcia Douglas and Stephanie Davis from our partners up in Deloitte. Marcia and Stephanie, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure, happy to. I'm Marcia Douglas. I'm a partner in our technology and transformation practice at Deloitte. I specialize in all things content lifecycle management, and I've been in the industry for about 30 years or so. Our group is pretty tightly tied to our Deloitte Office of Gen AI as well. And our Office of Gen AI develops and tests and manages Deloitte specific private cloud-based AI tools. We use those when we deliver projects or work on projects for clients. And also we spend a lot of time in our team exploring AI opportunities, developing AI strategies, roadmaps, use cases, and putting prototypes into production. So happy to chat with you today about all things AI and all things records.
You're in the right space. I mean, after 30 years in the business, this is where it's all been leading to. We've been talking about it for decades, but we're getting there. Stephanie, would you like to
Uh, yeah, absolutely. And sorry, Nerds Unite. Very glad to be having this conversation and to be here today. So I have 12 years experience helping organizations manage and consider risk when it comes to information, AI, as well as thinking about how to protect privacy of both employees and customers. So helping organizations build program skills and engagement models that address risks and concerns when it comes to using really cool platforms like AI and helping to build trust along that journey as well. So, a lot to cover off on the topic and excited to have that discussion.
Excellent. Well, I'm very pleased to have both of you as we, as a community, try to make sense of we're moving into this new world of Gen AI. We're moving into this world of just more general AI models being moved out throughout the entire ecosystem. And I'm definitely learning that it's going to take all of us to figure out how do we make it safe and have business value at the same time. What I'd love to start with, Marcia, is what are you seeing in the market right now when it comes to implementing new AI solutions? Where are we headed? Where are we at?
So that's really interesting. I think in terms of organizations that we've worked with, playing around with Gen AI and AI in general, it's really covering, I would say, about three different areas. So one, we see some of it being purely internal. So organizations that are looking at AI and Gen AI for their own productivity enhancement. As an example, even inside Deloitte, we've created our own Gen AI tools to facilitate things like interview and note summarization, document summarization, doing code development, all those kinds of things. So these sit within our own private network and data so that anything that we use sits in our environment that doesn't go and feed to public LLM models. But a lot of organizations aren't necessarily investing in private cloud environments. They might be doing some of those things similar to us. They're out there doing it in the public domain. So productivity enhancement. Second thing I think we're seeing things around what I would call document or knowledge bases. So here we see clients working either their internal agents, knowledge workers, their call center operators, maybe, who are accessing documents like policies, procedures, work instructions, standard operating procedures, those types of things to be able to answer questions more quickly, facilitate their internal operations going more quickly, make those decisions. We're seeing things in insurance and banking like this, where call center agents might query a knowledge base to get answers quickly rather than that more traditional searching through reams of policy document libraries or file shares or SharePoint sites to find the answer. And then I think the third area we're seeing more of as well is AI and Gen AI used to enhance the client or the customer user experience. That's usually through providing something that's much more intuitive, maybe a querying tool, maybe a chat bot. This can range from very well enabled chatbots to things that are much more simple. And we've seen things, for example, one of the major hospitals here in Ontario is using a chatbot for things like pre surgery activities. So a patient can query the chatbot about what should I expect when I'm going into my surgery? How long will the recovery time be? What kind of results might I feel afterwards in the first 24 hours, 48 hours? Those kinds of chat enabled tools have allowed them to take a lot of pressure off of nursing and surgical staff for patients that are going through that. So we see a lot of very interesting dynamics that way. What I'm not seeing yet, though we hear a lot of talk about it, is AI tools that are doing things without a human in the loop. And that's where I think we'll get to some very interesting ideas around how these tools are being used, but also how we're tracking what they're doing and whether those things are records we should be hanging on to.
What do you think it'll take to get us there? Is it a security question? Is it an AI maturity question? I'm curious about that aspect of the world you're seeing.
So I think from that perspective, it's a little bit of both. I mean, we are still as a technology environment playing around with things that don't involve human in the loop and making sure that the various agent to agent interactions are operating properly, because that's a lot of what the non-human in the loop decision making requires on is a multimodal agent environment. So a lot of organizations are not quite yet to that stage. But in terms of general AI adoption, I don't know about you, Stephanie, but certainly our teams have seen a tremendous amount of interest and a lot of experimentation.
Yeah, I'm completely aligned with that comment. And I think we'll talk more about the how they're doing that effectively, securely at the same time. But a lot comes down to the kind of oversight in terms of what's happening alongside experimentation. So not necessarily restricting teams to the nth degree. So giving room for innovation while also ensuring the guardrails are in place to enable that innovation to be done in a safe manner as well.
So I was reading a book the other day, and they were talking about how in the 1980s, their Hewlett Packard was talking about AI, and this is something now that we would call more like knowledge bases or expert systems. But in some ways, this dream of being able to take the collective knowledge of a company or an organization and surface it up into the chatbots and surface that up into the useful knowledge bases, or eventually even take the human out of the loop. I mean, it's almost 40, 50 years people have been dreaming about this sort of stuff. So now we're here. We've kind of started to get these tools that are like they feel like they're on the cusp, but then the reality of security and privacy and all of this starts to step in. Marcia, I'm curious, are you seeing organizations who get really excited about the business case and the potential cost savings or, growth opportunities, then take a step back and say, "Yeah, we need to slow roll this while we figure out how to actually govern these AI systems."
I wouldn't say we're seeing step backs. I don't see that across any of the clients that we're dealing with right now. They're all keen to experiment and move forward. How quickly they take something out of a proof of concept and into production might be different. So I think they're maybe spending a little bit more time in that proof of concept area while they work on some of the glitches and make sure that they are feeling comfortable around how the AI is behaving, that they feel that they're not seeing a lot of hallucinations. They're feeling confident about the accuracy of the responses they're getting out of the AI engine. That being said, we sort of need to reflect back on some of the initial things you talked about and the questions around this, which is, how much governance do they really have around this as a whole? And are they really understanding that in many cases they might be creating business records out of these AI activities?
Can you dig into that thread a little bit more? So when should an organization move into saying that they are creating business records with their AI activities? What are the signals so that they would know that, hey, it's time to start treating the outputs of these AI systems as business records?
I think that for a lot of organizations, I would still say I defer to Steph on some of her experiences on this as well, but I would still say that many organizations haven't even started thinking about whether these are business records or not. How do we know if they are? I think we've got the basic guardrails in the standards to understand when we have a business record. We have something that's documenting business decision. It's something that's documenting a financial or a legal or operational activity that needs to be considered as a business activity and business decision. The item has authenticity and reliability and integrity, all those good things that are in standard ISO documentation. I don't think there's any challenge in sort of articulating if something's a business record. I just don't know whether people understand that these are actually being created or not. And in particular, where we're gathering data from all kinds of parts of the organization, including personally identifiable information. I don't know whether people are really thinking that through completely. I don't, Steph, what's your thoughts?
Yeah,
Do you see the time?
absolutely. And I'm happy to weigh in because I think you gave an amazing overview of just the the basics, the importance of what makes up a record generally, and then when you tack on how that works operationally, in particular when it comes to AI, that's where I'm not seeing the connections yet entirely being made, especially by organizations just saying, you know, is an information exchange that is not necessarily a decision, a record that needs to be kept. So a lot of questions about, how far along you go and what you're saving. And so because we're not seeing this being heavily scrutinized by regulatory bodies right this minute, it's more about a risk management area for organizations to tackle to say, oh, should we save it just in case someone comes back and starts, there's a lawsuit on what decision was made and why. And so I'd say a lot of what the focus is on right now has to do with very specific AI use cases. And so looking at, if there's a customer interaction, well, there's a potentially greater risk area in that exchange. And therefore, we absolutely must keep it as a record versus, for instance, you gave an example of, surfacing content or and maybe it's an employee in an organization. Well, that likely doesn't need to be saved. There's not a heck of a lot of risk in that potentially. So that's where we're seeing organizations focus right now. I think as the regulatory regime becomes more mature in AI, particularly in North America, we'll start to get more stringent guidance or stringent requirements for what is saved in what context. And that will absolutely need to be adhered to. So I definitely look and monitor what's going to be happening down that front as well. I'd say that, from a risk mitigation standpoint, I go back to like the keeping humans in the loop construct. So record keeping is tackled through that domain area or that kind of interaction checkpoints rather, so that there's oversight for how the model is functioning and decisions made around the model from a risk mitigation standpoint right now.
Very good. Are you seeing any industries that are being more proactive in treating their AI driven interactions as records, especially when we start to talk about things like PII and the privacy laws that are, well, at least down here in the States, at least a good portion of our states are putting out new privacy laws and they mostly match, but not perfectly. And just the long tail of privacy laws across the globe as everyone tries to get a handle on the how do we treat data appropriately.
So I'd say it's less about saying which specific industry is more proactive and more about which specific industry is embracing AI as a starting point. So for instance, in like the government domain area, it's not as actively used today as financial services. I personally am not seeing the emphasis placed on record keeping as part of that, more just figuring out how we can solve for productivity, solve for an operational need or an interaction need through using AI effectively. A lot of questions on where there may be implications on the privacy side in terms of what data is being used in training, what data is provided as, or what PI is being provided as an output, and whether or not it should be provided to the individual requesting it. But primarily, it's more looking at like across sector, looking at specific use cases and saying, where is the risk in this situation? And I'm not surprised by that. Like we're at a, relative immature for the uptake of AI in general. And so as time progresses and you see more organizations actively using it for more and more things, there will become more standards in place around that. I think it's just a matter of time in that regard and a matter of risk servicing on it.
So I've been having conversations with lots of different organizations, and part of figuring out how to properly handle records in and out of AI. It seems like they're also trying to build out organizational structures to address this topic. And there's a few different models that I've seen. Sometimes it's the privacy folks pushing it. Sometimes it's the security folks pushing it. Sometimes you'll see organizations creating just big top little level boards to look across the whole organization, even chief AI officers. Like, who are you currently seeing being the champion of good data governance, good information management, to kind of make sure that we can fully enable all the business use cases down the line?
So I appreciate and am seeing all of the same examples you just gave. Often we see a big proponent of a risk management function who is progressing this forward, which could also be a CISO. I would say this comes back in some ways to the culture of the sector and the organization itself, as well as the kind of authority that some of the leaders have. So for instance, it's more, sometimes the privacy officer takes on the domain of I'm also going to be a trust officer. And I will operate with our data office and our AI office in a way that's sort of a, extension subject matter expert that weighs in on all facets and decisions related to different AI use cases. Other times you could say the data office and the privacy office actually look at becoming more ingrained and solidified as one. So I'd say there's no one right. This is the answer across the board. Organizations are trying to figure this out, and it goes back to their own situations, their own cultural norms as well. I don't know, Mark, if you have anything more that you're seeing different than that.
No, I think a lot of it still goes to the fact that we have various groups within the organizations that have invested interest in leveraging AI and using AI. So there's some internal struggles I think that we see going on where the technology teams that know how these things should be set up and constructed are not necessarily tightly associated in some organizations with the governance teams that are much more focused on regulatory compliance and alignment and protection of from liability and protection for reputational risk and those kinds of things that we see more from the risk management groups, the CROs, the privacy groups, the data governance groups in general. So those organizations that are approaching it, I think, Joe, are the ones that have looked at this in a broad perspective and understood that they need to bring expertise and opinion from a variety of individuals across their organization to figure out how do we best administer it and make sure that it doesn't run away from us. But how do we also not slow the whole process down so that we can take advantage of using this not only for our internal productivity, but to benefit our customers' clients?
Very good. So slightly different topic. I'm sure you guys are both aware of the ChatGPT kind of data leak that we had the other day. I'm curious, how are you seeing businesses approach the whole retention and management of AI driven records since that breach?
Wow, I don't know that it's really brought it as much to the forefront as maybe we'd like it to, Joe, because I think companies are still trying to figure out how they deal with AI as a record, whether it truly is. It kind of goes back to our discussion about what is a record and where should we be grabbing the record and when. So where they find the obvious things. So for example, I want to create an AI tool. I'm going to need some data to do training with. They're understanding they shouldn't be using data out in the public domain, their own data, that they should be setting up firewalls and private sections to be cognizant that they're not using PII in some of those training sets. They're becoming conscious of those kinds of things, which I think are pretty obvious. But some of the other ones, I'm not sure that they are thinking very rigorously about whether those AI conversations are really records. And I'd say there's other challenges too. I mean, we talked about, oh, what's the standard record based on industry standard, but within the AI world, there's some interesting changes around AI interactions. There's a volatility around AI that's not the same with a traditional record. For example, large language models get updated and improved over time. And as a result, an AI response might actually change over time, depending on when it's queried. So that can be problematic. And the provenance for an AI exchange. So who's really the author? Is it the user? Is it the AI tool? Is it the organization? Where are we putting accountability for these kinds of things? I think really, I don't know. Steph, I haven't seen organizations even begin to think through some of those things?
Not formally across the board, but I'm seeing situations where accountability really faltered. An organization, one in particular I'm thinking of that I won't name, where they realized, oh yeah, we need to not only point to the source of truth where, it says this in our policy, so don't necessarily always trust our AI bot to give you the exact right answer. And realizing they need to kind of cover their ass when it comes to the fact that it's their AI chatbot. So how can you say it's an authoritative source if you can't rely on it to be one? So that's where you look at the kind of notice statements that are provided to consumers and users of AI to outline the organization's accountability, where the data is actually going, whether or not it's 100% reliable here, and pointing to a reliable source to validate for an end user that it is actually the right information you should be receiving in the first place. And I think as LLMs and just our use of AI matures as well, and I feel like a broken record, like it will become more reliable. There will be more comfort in the outputs that are coming out of that. But right now, that's not the case. So you need to look at other means to get, to make sure you're covered in that regard.
So a lot of this stuff is new, right? I mean, it in some ways it's old. All good privacy policy stuff, and you should generally have a good foundation. In other ways, I mean, Marcia, you're pointing out, but the outputs are volatile now. They change as the models do. So it's a very new dynamic. Where do you both see us on the skills curve? Are we way behind? Are we, kind of on track? Where do we stand on the skills world for companies?
So that partly goes to ask you, what kind of skills are we talking about?
Well, the ability to, it's a very good question. So I think we're pretty strong on creating AI models, and we're learning that. Lots of developers are putting time into this. Some of the foundations like TensorFlow and that it's well over a decade old. People are starting to know how they work. But a lot of the conversations you were mentioning are very new around the data governance or the governance of the output and understanding how to apply privacy controls on top of these models that treat data differently than other systems. So I'm just curious where you think the skill sets are when it comes to companies being able to make the right decisions today to ensure that they don't end up on the front page of a newspaper and a lawsuit tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. For one thing, I would say that I don't think we lack the skills. I think that there are lots of skills in our organization that can be applied to this, and that we have good skills in many of our organizations. Well rounded, articulate, and knowledgeable people within our privacy groups, within our data governance groups, within our data management groups, some of which, some of those people firmly understand that, garbage in is garbage in. They need to clean up data to make AI successful, all those other good things. I think people are well aware and have good skills. I would say that in many cases, we may not find that organizations are asking the right questions or asking all the right questions. So, to the point of the ones that we've even brought up today, are they really even thinking about some of the generated interactions and exchanges of AI as being records? So, I think some of the questions just are maybe not being asked as much as not having the right skill sets in the organization. But the other thing that we dancing around is the whole accountability, potential for litigation, potential for reputational risk if there's breach. I would suggest, organizations really need to start acting more quickly. Don't wait for the regulations to force you to do something. We can see change in regulation in Europe already. It's going to come over across the water pretty soon. We should be proactively looking at how we establish organizations to better respond to potential changes in the regulatory dynamic, and so that we have accountable and authoritative AI activities happening in our organization. I don't know, Steph, do you think I mean, we have ethical frameworks. How many of our people are following?
Completely agree. And then I'll just add one other point to what you just said about asking the right questions. I think it's also about, as risk professionals, having the right expectations when it comes to the responses that are going to come back. So I'd say, like, even from a privacy standpoint, we're often saying we need to know exactly what is happening with that information. Like that's a standard. Give us the PI information life cycle from collection, use, disclosure, all of that fun stuff, and making sure that it's really clear to, and as part of maturing that function in the context of AI, saying you're not going to get that type of information fully. You'll dance around the start, the end product, the individual use case. The black box environment's going to be a little trickier. So then you have to look at all the other facets that you can get information on to be able to guide and inform the rest of the organization that actually this is good enough in terms of a control standpoint. And I'd always come back to like ensuring you're on front page, you know, like ensuring you don't have a breach, like an impossible statement. You're going to have something likely often than not. So it's about preparedness and how you handle it when it does happen, putting in as much guardrails as makes sense for the circumstance, and just knowing, the questions to ask. As to your point, Marcia, I think those are the kind of fundamentals alongside organizing saying, yeah, maybe I'm using this third party to help me, or like, to provide training data or to use their AI platform as part of our service. How do I assert my accountability and the controls that I require as part of that too? Because at the end of the day, the organization who's seeking third party support, they're the ones who are accountable. They're the ones whose face is going to be more likely than not on the news too, or have to face the burden when and if that third party is breached, in terms of responding to their customers, to, the public. So that's another facet that organizations are really starting to wrap their arms around to say, what due diligence can we do upfront on this? And how can we, look at the control frameworks that are good enough for us, that are also good enough for the third parties we're engaging with as well.
And I might just add one other thing to that, Joe, and this is where I think we need to, get the right kinds of things in place in organizations, not just those frameworks, not just the governance and the accountability understanding, but, this goes back to my quick comment about, data and making sure we have the right data, we're using the right data. A lot of organizations still struggle with understanding where their data is, what sets of data they have that have potentially responsive information or PII in them. They struggle very much still to understand where their risk profile is related to their data assets. And that's where many of them could use a lot of support and a lot of background work to get their house in order.
Yeah, I mean, that's the foundation that our company, for example, is built upon, right? I mean, just getting a handle on what we call your data estate is a critical first step, whether you're talking about a security initiative or a privacy initiative. And then that actually is a pretty good transition, if you will entertain me. I'd love to show you how we want to build on top of our core record point platform, our data governance platform, to actually start to enable some of these downstream workflows like feeding AI systems and that. So let me go ahead and share my screen. So what you're starting to see here is where we want to take our data governance platform. So remember, one of the core things that Record Point is really good at is we can connect to pretty much anything. We can connect to your structured data. We can connect to your unstructured data. We can read through that data. We can tell you when you have privacy signals or any of the various frameworks that you're looking for. We can look for PCI data. We can make sure that you're getting rid of it, and when your retention periods are up, you can hold it for legal holds, all this sort of stuff. So we are looking to expand that to help it become an enabler to the AI workflows that a lot of companies are working on. So the foundation of what we're proposing here is you have good control over what data you have. And now we want to give you good control over how that data is fed into your AI models so that you can use them in the spirit of following all of your internal controls around good data governance. So what you're seeing here is these are early stage prototypes. What you're seeing here is our new AI project that we're looking to create this is a standalone app from our core Record Point platform. So within this platform, we will go ahead and we will fill out a new project that we want to put together. And then we have the ability to go in here and start to filter out the data that we don't want to feed into the AI. So, for example, maybe we only want to send over contracts information into a contracts document. And we've gone out previously, we've looked through all of your SharePoints, we've looked through all of your box folders, all of your NAS storage drives. And so we know exactly where all of your contracts are stored within your various systems. From here, we're able to filter out things like if it has PII information in there, or we're able to filter out high and low risk data that is fed into your system. We have lots of other ways to kind of curate this sort of data before it feeds out to the AI. But at the core, you can see here that we're basically creating a workflow where we can take your entire data estate, slice it into a smaller chunk of data that we will then be able to go a little bit downstream and connect out to your various systems. Along the way, we are looking to provide you the reports so that you can understand the risk of this data, the source of this data, so that you can be intentional about the data that you are sharing out to your AI models. And we're also giving you some documentation that you can put into your compliance programs and that to keep track of the data that you're sending out here. So imagine that you are looking to hook up, for example, Microsoft Copilot. So we've built this data set against our data estate. We have the ability, or will eventually have the ability to sterilize the data going out. So we'll eventually be able to move PI information out of the documents and that's fed downstream. And now we say, hey, let's go ahead and send it out to Microsoft Copilot, for example. From here, we'll be able to create a live connection out to Copilot or the various other LLM systems. Or you can use an API to actually connect it to your own custom internal AI models that you're building. And that will allow us to pull you into an ecosystem where there's a live connection from your data estate flowing through the RecordPoint AI governance product that will ensure that at any point in time, we're keeping your data governed according to your various governance policies. We'll eventually move into the world of also passing through, for example, when you're inside of your Copilot studio, passing your security credentials back into your RecordPoint platform so that not only is the data governed, we're also ensuring that it's secure as it flows out to your various systems. So we're really looking for a world here where we're protecting your data, but yet we're enabling your teams, whether they're developing custom AI applications or they are developing, rollouts like your CIO is rolling out into Copilot or ChatGPT or these other productivity enhancing applications that are starting to become popular. So that's our quick, my quick 2-minute demo of what we're building. I'd love to hear your feedback on where we're heading and how you can see this being useful, or maybe even where we're missing some of the points from what you're seeing in the market right now.
I certainly think that this kind of capability is going to be really valuable for clients, right? They are, as we said, struggling to understand what their data environments really hold for them and where their vulnerabilities are. So any kind of assistive tools that can help expedite that are going to be really welcomed.
Excellent. Yeah, and we really strive to push heavily into the automatic classification of the data and things like that as well. So I mean, in an ideal world, we're going to make this as simple as possible. It's more about governing, the policies that you push into your data set. But that's where we're looking to go in the future, and hopefully we can enable some of these bigger projects that companies are trying to roll out. Any feedback from
Faster you can do it, Joe, the better, because then Stephanie and I can both retire.
one thing we all know about technology is as soon as we figure out one problem, we come up with a much more complex problem to solve next. So we will, you can put in another 30 years and you'll still be well valued in the industry.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'd add is that there's not a silver bullet here, but there's help along the way, and that's exactly what I see this as, because there's so many different facets to AI governance, the challenge around it. Technology plays an incredibly important role, and in this case, the solution that you can see is quite valuable. And so now thinking about the other facets that are necessary to have your arms a bit more wrapped around the risk that we're seeing on AI, it's so critical. So yeah, I'd say a great step in this journey. Absolutely.
Well, that's great feedback. Thank you. And for anyone who's listening that might be interested, we are actively recruiting a wait list for early adopters. So please do reach out on our website and search for our AI governance product if you'd like to sign up for that program. But more importantly, Marcia and Stephanie, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you can help companies enable their broader information management programs, and then more specifically, their AI rollout initiatives.
Yeah. So we'd be happy to do that. So certainly within Deloitte, obviously, both Stephanie and I work closely together in many cases on work for our clients where we're helping them to understand what their best use cases are in terms of moving through with AI, because there's always a million ideas out there in their organizations, but understanding those that you can really prioritize that will give you the most benefits, either from operation efficiency or to the enhancements or better customer and client service. So we'll help them kind of map through what some of those potential use cases would be. Also look at the complexity of how to build those AI models, how to build those AI tool sets that will enable to them to activate, how to get them through proof of concepts and all that good stuff around testing and making sure it's actually can go into production. But equally important along that way, we're spending time with them around the whole issue of AI governance and how they can make sure they're building a really solid foundation, not for a single project, but for a program of activity.
Yeah. And I'll just add from an operational standpoint, that looks at, the types of controls and assessments that are being done through a variety of different functions and helping to streamline for teams who are actively working on those use cases, recognizing that AI governance isn't just, a responsibility of a single team. There's many more security, privacy, procurement, legal, like that do come into play. And so we want to make sure that when we're working with our clients, we help them connect the dots across teams so that they have the coverage as they build and deploy new solutions. So we're happy to play at those levels. We're also happy to enable from a strategic standpoint where you start to ask, going back for a second, is this the right use case for us? Or fundamental questions of how does our organization want to embrace AI? What parts of our business are we servicing? What are our strategic objectives around it? Where do we play and what vendors do we work with? So I'd say there's basically, if you're struggling on any of these topics, we're available to support you through that journey.
That's great to hear. I mean, there's huge opportunity in the world of artificial intelligence, but I think we all know that it's going to take a community. It's going to take, expert advisors. It's going to take tools. It's going to take internal training, and it's going to take a bit of time and intentionality if we're going to make sure that we can enable these really big business cases. So, Marcia, Stephanie, I can say I personally learned a lot. Thank you both very much for coming on Filed. And I will end by saying thank you very much and have a great day.